Hey there, welcome. You've made it just in time. Tonight, we're not just telling a story. We're stepping into one. Into shadows and candlelight, into bloodied soil and steel. Into the kind of life that doesn't ask for comfort, only survival. If you're watching this late at night, you're in the right state of mind. Dim the lights, let the silence stretch a little longer than usual. Maybe crack a window or turn on a fan, something to stir the stillness around you. This isn't the kind of story you rush through. It's one you feel in your bones. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. What time is it for you right now? What's the weather like outside your window? That quiet hum in your room? It's just the past catching its breath. Because tonight we begin to walk alongside a man who did not live quietly. Miyamoto Musashi, swordsman, painter, philosopher, drifter. Some call him a warrior saint. Others call him a demon in human skin. But truth, he was just a man. A deeply scarred, restless man. With hands calloused from the weight of a sword and a mind sharper than any blade he ever wielded. It all starts here, with a child, a cry, a world at war. Japan, 1584. The country isn't whole. It's a broken mirror. Each shard ruled by its own lord. Each reflection stained red. Historians call it the Sengoku period, the Warring States era. It sounds clinical, almost elegant. But there's nothing elegant about it. This was an age when ambition marched on scorched earth, when alliances were as stable as spring rain, and when a boy's birthright was often written in ash. And in the hills of Harima province, rough, unyielding land where the wind bites harder than the cold, a child is born. He will not remember it, but the land will. The land always remembers those who bleed into it. The village is called Miyamoto, just a scatter of wooden homes nestled against the weathered mountains, where farmers plant in silence and sleep with one ear open. There's no fanfare when you arrive, no omen in the sky, just the aching groan of another winter and the steady breath of a woman in labor. You come into this world not wrapped in silks, but in coarse cloth that scratches your newborn skin. No golden trinkets, no incense offerings, just the hard hands of a father who does not smile. His name is Shinmen Munisai, a samurai without a master, a swordsman by trade, a man who sees the world through the edge of a blade. He is not gentle, he is not kind, he is precise. Some say he was one of the best in the land, a duel winner. A man who trained under the old schools of killing. He knows the rhythm of combat, the way a wrist must turn just before it splits flesh. And from the moment you arrive, slick, howling, and small, he sees you not as a child but as a vessel, something to shape, something to sharpen. You don't get lullabies, you get lectures. You don't crawl toward toys, you crawl toward wooden practice swords, often hurled at your feet with no warning. Pain is not a punishment in your house. It is a teacher. And like all teachers in times like these, it speaks loudly and without mercy. By the time you're 6, your knuckles are raw more often than not. There's no affection waiting for you at the end of the day. Just another round of drills, another critique, another whispered judgment muttered into the night when your father thinks you're too tired to hear. And yet, you do hear. Every word, every silence, every look that lingers too long on your failures. But you don't break. There's something feral in you, something unteachable. While other children laugh and play in the fading light, you watch, you study. You think like a predator, even before you know what a predator is. You wait for patterns, for weakness. You learn how to take hits and give them back harder. You don't play by the rules because the rules were never made for people like you. You are not the golden child. You are the storm that waits beyond the mountains. Sometimes when the rain comes and the roof leaks, you lie awake and listen to your father breathe across the room. You wonder what he dreams of. Glory? Regret? Or does he dream of bloodshed, the only language he truly speaks? One morning, your hands bleeding from splinters, you dare to ask him why you must train so hard. He looks at you the way a hawk might look at a stone and says, "Because the world doesn't care if you're ready. It only asks if you're alive after." You don't ask again, but you remember it. The village around you is small, and it does not forgive weakness. Your name, Musashi, begins to carry the weight of your father's reputation. Some look at you with curiosity, others with caution. You're the boy who doesn't cry, the boy who doesn't lose fights, the boy who walks alone even when surrounded. And then one day, without warning, your father disappears. Gone. Like smoke on the wind, maybe to fight, maybe to run. No one tells you why, and no one comes to take his place. You're left behind, a child, alone, but something strange happens. You do not break. In that silence, in the absence of the only hand that ever taught you how to strike, you begin to forge yourself. You practice alone. You shadow duel the wind. You carve shapes into the bark of trees, with a stick, as if the trees were your enemies, and the world your arena. You grow tall, wild, your hair unkempt, your nails dirty. You don't care. You're not here to impress anyone. You're here to win. When you fight your first duel, a real duel, you're 13. The man you face is older, bigger, a trained samurai with a name, a title, and a steel blade. You have a carved wooden bakken and a silence that runs deeper than any war drum. When it's over, the man lies twitching in the dirt and you're still standing. Blood on your clothes, no remorse in your eyes. People begin to whisper, not just about your skill, but about the look you carry. That half-wild, haunted stare, like you've already seen the end of the road and kept walking anyway. You don't know it yet, but this was the first echo, the first ripple, a boy born into chaos. A weapon raised in the dark, and the world is starting to notice. They will call you many things, demon, master, madman, philosopher. But none of those names will ever quite hold you, because you are not a man who can be held, not by titles, not by fear, not by anything at all. The duel changes everything, not just because you win, but because of how you win. The crowd wasn't large, just a handful of men and boys, farmers mostly, a few drunk with courage and rice wine. But they remember. They remember how the taller man shouted your name like it was a challenge, how his steel blade caught the light, how your wooden sword didn't shine, didn't gleam, but how it landed with a sickening crack. You didn't hesitate, not once. No flourish, no showmanship, just one perfect, brutal movement. An arc as fluid and final as falling rain. He went down clutching his ribs, his breath ragged, blood bubbling in the back of his throat. You stood there, chest rising, fists clenched, and for the first time they looked at you not as a child, but as something else. A question they couldn't answer. A shape they didn't know how to fit into their old world. Word spreads, and with word comes challenge. Because in this era, this war-sick century of shifting allegiances and broken oaths, skill is currency. Reputation is survival. If you want to eat, if you want to walk the roads without being cut down by bandits or pressed into a warlord's ranks, you need a name, and a name only matters if it's sharp enough to be feared. So you walk, village to village. No destination, just hunger and purpose. Your clothes wear thin. Your sandals tear apart at the soles. You sleep in empty fields, in shrines abandoned by monks long since buried. Sometimes you steal. Sometimes you trade tricks with traveling merchants, carving tiny animals from sticks in exchange for a bowl of millet or half a roasted sweet potato. But always you train. Always you fight. It becomes a rhythm. The sound of the bakken striking bark. The way your breathing slows into silence before a duel. And always, always, the moment just before you win, when your mind goes still, empty, not peace, not joy, just the absence of everything. That's what you begin to chase, not victory, but that silence, that second when all noise fades and the world becomes motion and instinct. You are 16 the next time a man tries to kill you. He's no drunk, no show-off samurai looking for reputation. He's a killer, a ronin with empty eyes and calloused hands. He doesn't ask your name, doesn't announce his own, just steps into the middle of the road as you pass and draws his sword. And you know, this time, if you hesitate, you die. You don't hesitate. It takes less than 10 seconds. Later, as the crows circle overhead, you stare at the blood on your wrists and feel nothing. No triumph, no sorrow, no thrill. Just a quiet, just that same hush as before, and something shifts in you. Not all fights are worth fighting. So you begin to choose your opponents. You start to listen, to wait. You stop chasing every whispered challenge, every sneer. You begin to understand the weight of killing, how it stains you even when you don't see it. You begin to see that skill is not the same as wisdom. You carry this thought with you as you travel east, through forests where the trees lean like old warriors, bent but unbroken, through towns where warlords press peasants into armies, where ash coats the thatched roofs and children play with sticks pretending to be heroes. You begin to write, in a crude notebook bound with twine and wrapped in cloth. Not just notes on technique, but thoughts, phrases that come to you after long silences, questions you don't know how to answer. What is mastery? Is it victory without effort? Is it peace through dominance? Or is it something else, something quieter? You duel again and again. Each time you win. Your hands grow stronger, your eyes sharper, but your soul, it remains untamed, restless. There are whispers of you now. The boy with the wild hair, the swordsman who fights with wood and leaves bodies behind, the monk in rags who recites poetry after combat, the demon who walks without armor. You are 17 when you challenge the Yoshioka school. Kyoto, the capital, a place of painted fans and blood-soaked alleys, of rigid hierarchy and ancient grudges. The Yoshioka are powerful, one of the most respected martial families in the country, backed by wealth, name, and legacy. And you, a boy from nowhere, unwashed, untitled, uninvited. But your challenge is accepted, because your name is loud enough now. The duel is set, and they send out Seijuro, the head of the school. You don't sleep the night before. You sit beneath a tree, alone. The cicadas sing around you like war drums. You breathe slowly, deeply. And in your mind you walk through every movement, every strike, every possible death. The next morning you arrive late, purposefully. He is already waiting, polished, poised, surrounded by students and silence. You carry your wooden sword. He carries steel. The crowd parts. You bow, briefly. He nods once, and then movement, swift, final. He falls, not dead, but broken, his pride shattered, his name cracked like porcelain. The crowd doesn't cheer. They watch you walk away in silence. Days later, they send his brother another duel, another broken body. Now the whispers grow. Now you are more than rumor. You are the storm at the gates, and the Yoshioka know it. So they plan one final meeting, a third duel. This time, they intend to kill you. But that is another part of the story. And you are not ready to die yet. Night presses against the city like a held breath. Kyoto, once a cradle of beauty and ritual, now watches from behind shuttered windows and trembling lanterns. Beneath its elegant roofs and paper screens, whispers skitter like rats in the rafters. Whispers of you. The Ronin boy, the mountain wolf, the one who brought the Yoshioka clan to its knees, not once but twice. A broken legacy now clinging to pride like a drowning man clings to driftwood. They've had enough. They offer a third duel, another chance, a final redemption. But you know better. This isn't a duel, it's an ambush. 100 men, maybe more. Swords, bows, traps in the trees. The very ground will rise against you. They don't want honor. They want your corpse left bleeding in the dust. A warning nailed to the earth itself. But you accept anyway. Because you're not playing their game. You've started writing your own. You arrive before dawn. The sky is still dark, stitched with the last stars. The air is cold, not with weather but with something older. The kind of cold that comes before violence, before the first scream, before the first drop of blood stains the soil. You move like a shadow, light-footed, barely breathing. Your sword, still wood, rests against your back like a sleeping animal. They wait at Ichijoji Temple, their silhouettes stretched long in the flickering torchlight. Some are crouched in the trees, others behind walls, blades drawn. Young, nervous, arrogant. You walk into their trap, with your eyes wide open. And then, before they can strike, you strike. Not with hesitation, not with fury, but with precision. You move like the wind across a river. Not fast, fluid, effortless. The first man doesn't even cry out, just drops, blinking in disbelief at the darkness blooming in his chest. Another steps forward. Another falls. You do not fight like a man. You fight like something older than war. They panic. Break formation. Discipline melts. The trap unravels. Steel clatters. Arrows fly wild. A horse bolts screaming into the dawn. You vanish into the chaos only to reappear behind another blade. Then another. Then another. You are not in the battle. You are the battle. Some try to run. Some drop their swords. A few fight. All fall. By the time the sun crests over the horizon, Ichijoji Temple smells of blood and smoke. Bodies lie tangled in grass, their pride leaking out in red ribbons. The air is silent, but for the birds, indifferent witnesses to massacre. You stand alone, one man against an army, and you are still breathing, still unbroken. You leave without a word, not out of mercy, not out of fatigue, but because there is nothing left to prove. The Yoshioka are finished. Their name, once carved into Kyoto's stone, now fades like chalk in rain. They wagered everything on your destruction, and they lost. You, the peasant's son, the wild boy from the mountains, the wolf with no master. You don't look back, because forward is the only direction the blade ever travels. You walk for weeks, through mountain passes where snow clings like ghosts, through river valleys where no one knows your name, and that is a relief. You eat what you can find, sleep where you collapse, speak only when necessary, and always you carry your bakken. It is no longer just a weapon. It is a memory of discipline, of restraint, of something greater than slaughter. You begin to wonder, is victory the point? Or is it what victory costs? You see a village burning one night, another feud between lords, another line drawn in blood, women weeping into ash, children hiding under floorboards, and for the first time, you do not reach for your sword. You reach inward for questions. Who are you without an enemy? What lives when the fight is done? You spend a season in a monastery, not as a monk, not quite. You sweep, you sit, you breathe. You learn to listen to the sound of water dripping onto stone. You sketch, ink and brush, trembling at first, then smooth, then confident. You draw not warriors but waves, not blood but branches. You write your thoughts down in silence, letting them bloom without judgment. And slowly you feel the edge inside you soften. Not dull, but deepen. You are no longer chasing the next fight. You are studying it. You are 17, maybe 18, and already the legend is growing around you like ivy on a grave. But you're not interested in legend. Not yet. You're interested in truth. And somewhere, beneath the steel, the scars, the silence, you know it's still waiting for you. Out there, beyond the next mountain, beyond the next name, beyond the sword, but not today. Today you rest beneath a pine tree as the wind stirs the grass and carries the smell of wood smoke and memory. And for the first time in your life, you sleep without your hand on the hilt. The seasons turn like pages in a wind-worn book. Leaves redden, fall, rot, and rise again. Rivers swell with spring and shrink beneath summer's heel. The land breathes, warily, wearily, unsure whether to hope or brace for the next tide of blood. You walk among it all like a ghost with skin, not searching, not running, just moving, like a blade loosed from its scabbard, not yet striking. Your name follows you now, even when you don't speak it. In mountain inns, they whisper of the one who felled the Yoshioka. Children mimic your duels with branches in the mud. Bandits avoid the narrow roads where your footprints were last seen. Samurai, proud, desperate, curious, send letters, then messengers, then themselves. Most are too young, too confident. They want the glory of testing their steel against the storm. Few walk away. You take no pleasure in it. No joy in their blood, but you don't pity them either. They made their choice, and so did you. Still, the weight grows heavier. With every swing, every shattered rib, every stunned breath slipping out of a dying mouth, you feel the gravity of your own myth pressing down, shaping you, trapping you. What happens when you're no longer the underdog? What happens when your shadow precedes you into the room? You find yourself stopping in smaller towns, staying longer, watching lives unfold from the quiet edges. You help a farmer build a fence, chase wolves away from a shepherd's flock, Carry a sick child across a flooded stream. Strange, uncomfortable. Not because it's hard, but because it's easy. No challenge, no duel, no blood. Just living. And you don't quite know how to live. One night, under a sky crackling with stars, you meet a monk traveling alone. He carries nothing but a gnarled staff, a pack of dried tea leaves, and a smile that doesn't seem to end. You sit by his fire, share silence, then words. He knows who you are, doesn't flinch. You fight well, he says. I survive, you reply. He stirs his tea. There's a difference. You don't argue, you don't have to. He sees it in your eyes. He doesn't tell you to lay down the sword. He simply asks, if the sword is your truth, what do you do when truth becomes a burden? That night, long after he's snoring beneath his robes, you stare into the embers and feel something shift. Not in your body, but deeper. A crack in the center of the silence. You keep walking. You find a remote temple, nestled in fog and cedar. The monks are reluctant but curious. You don't ask to stay. You simply help. Clean the steps, carry water. Sit for hours in the garden, listening to wind push through bamboo like an old man sighing. There, your training changes. Not less, not weaker, but inward. Sword in hand, you begin practicing alone. Not to fight, but to understand. Each cut becomes a breath. Each form, a question. You trace invisible enemies in the air, not to kill them, but to study your own motion, your own mind. You learn stillness. You learn calligraphy, though your strokes are blunt and impatient at first. You copy poems, then invent your own. Short ones mostly, like little splinters of thought. Steel without spirit is noise. Victory without clarity is shame. The blade is not the point. The other monks begin to nod at you in the mornings. You nod back. You don't belong here, but for now you fit. You are 20 when the letter comes. It's been years since anyone found you. You made sure of that. No paper trail, no duel announcements, no provocations. And yet the past knows how to find its own. The scroll is sealed with the crest of the Hosokawa clan. Powerful, feared, and deadly curious. Inside, an invitation. A duel, but not for pride, not for reputation. This time, for honor. The challenger is Sasaki Kojiro. You've heard the name before, everyone has. A master of the long sword. Elegant, deadly, precise. Called the demon of the western provinces. You've heard he moves like a wave, graceful and overwhelming. They say his sword is as long as fate and twice as sharp. They say no one has seen his blade unsheathed and survived to describe it. The invitation is polite, formal, but beneath the ink you can smell it. The promise of finality. This isn't another rung on the ladder. This is the mountain itself. You fold the letter, take a breath, and begin to pack. Not in haste, not with fear, but with quiet inevitability. The time has come. Not for glory, not for fame, but for the one thing you've never truly had, an equal. The sea is calm the morning you set sail. A pale mist hangs over the harbor like a veil, blurring the line between ocean and sky. The fishing boats creak and sway gently, their hulls whispering old secrets to the tide. Somewhere, a gull calls out, lonely, distant, and its cry vanishes into the salt, heavy hush. You step aboard a small boat, flat-bottomed and low to the water. The ferryman doesn't speak much, just nods once when he sees you, then gestures toward the worn plank that leads onto the deck. You nod back. No words are needed. The duel has been arranged for Ganryu Island, a quiet spit of land off the coast, uninhabited and windswept, chosen for its isolation, its silence, its capacity to witness death without flinching. It's a long ride, and you do not rush it. You sit near the bow, legs folded, your sword, a bakken once more but longer now, carved from a single oar, resting across your lap. You carved it yourself the night before, smoothed it with river stones, shaped it with the same care you once gave to every breath in meditation. It's heavy, thicker than most swords, but it feels right. There's a rhythm to the oars, a slow, patient beat. It reminds you of the monks' chanting, of rain on temple roofs, of your own heartbeat years ago standing outside Ichijoji, knowing you might die and choosing not to be afraid. You close your eyes, and time slips sideways. You remember the first time you saw blood on your hands, how your fingers trembled, how your chest felt too tight to breathe. You remember the second time, how it felt colder. You remember forgetting what mercy sounded like, what softness felt like. You remember standing in fields of bodies, not with pride, but with silence. You remember wondering who you were becoming, and now, here you are, drifting toward a man who may end you, or be ended by you. Not out of rage, not out of hatred, but because this is what your lives have led you to. Because some questions can't be answered in ink or breath, only in steel. The island appears slowly through the mist. Flat, quiet, empty except for the low sweep of rock and a strip of coarse sand along its shore. There are birds circling high above. They know, as if drawn by the scent of fate. The ferryman grounds the boat. You step off barefoot, your feet sinking slightly into the wet earth. The air here is different, clean, ancient, the kind of air that hasn't changed in centuries. Across the island, a figure stands already waiting. Sasaki Kojiro. Even from a distance, you can see the elegance in his stance. Tall, composed, dressed in indigo robes that stir slightly with the breeze. His nodachi, the legendary longsword, rests in his hand, unsheathed, tip brushing the ground like a whisper of death. He does not move. You walk slowly, deliberately, every footstep a silent drumbeat. When you reach him, you bow. Not deeply, not mockingly, just enough. He returns it. No words. There is nothing left to say. The world holds its breath. And then, you move. His sword arcs first, a gleam of silver so fast it splits the morning air. But you are already there, past it. Your bakken rising like a tide breaking against stone. The crack of wood on bone echoes across the island. Then silence. Kojiro stumbles, eyes wide. A moment of disbelief passing like shadow over his face. He drops to his knees, then to the earth. Blood stains the sand. Your breath comes hard now, not from exhaustion, but from something deeper. Regret? No, respect. You do not gloat, do not speak. You kneel beside him. His eyes find yours. Calm, no hatred, no fear. Only the faintest trace of something neither of you will say aloud. Peace. And then he exhales. The duel is over. You rise, slowly, your bakken dark with blood. The island, once so still, seems to breathe again. The wind picks up, the birds scatter. You walk back toward the boat. The ferryman says nothing, just watches you with the expression of someone who knows he will tell this story for the rest of his life, and never quite believe it. The sea is quieter now, or maybe it's you. You sit once more at the bow, sword across your lap, the island shrinking behind you. And in the stillness of the ride back, something breaks open in your chest. Not pain, not joy, but a strange, unfamiliar ache, like laying down a burden you've carried so long you forgot it had weight. You close your eyes, and for the first time in your life, you don't dream of battle. You dream of waves, of ink, of stillness. The years drift by like fog through pine, unnoticed, unclaimed, and for once you let them. You no longer chase the next duel. You no longer need to prove yourself to the world, or to the ghosts that used to live in your shadow. The sea, the sword, the silence, they've all done their work. Now you walk with less noise, not because you are hiding, but because power, once mastered, no longer needs to announce itself. You travel from province to province, a tall figure in worn robes, weathered hands, a quiet gaze. Children sometimes follow you, giggling, whispering behind their sleeves. Is that him? You don't answer, but sometimes you smile. The land is changing again. The old clans fall. New lords rise. The Tokugawa shogunate tightens its grip around the throat of the country. Peace, they call it. A peace bought with obedience, with silence, with hierarchy set in ink and blood. But you're no one's vassal. You're not samurai, not soldier, not priest. You are something else now, something nameless. And in that namelessness, you begin to find your truest voice. You take shelter in quiet temples, in roadside shrines, in the abandoned corners of fading towns. You sleep beneath trees, share meals with farmers, listen to the old women gossip as they wash rice. And you write. Not declarations, not strategy, not even poetry, but questions, observations, pieces of something bigger. You write on scraps of paper, on the backs of worn scrolls, in the margins of borrowed books. You don't plan to turn it into anything, at least not yet. But the words come anyway. Perception is strong and sight weak. To know 10,000 things, know one well. The true science of martial arts means practicing the way of the warrior as a way of life. You sharpen your calligraphy the same way you once honed your blade, stroke by stroke, breath by breath. It's a different kind of battle, one against yourself, against ego, against haste, and often you lose. But you keep returning to the page, because here in the quiet the sword is no longer for killing, it's for understanding. You begin to attract students, not many, not the ambitious ones looking to wear your name like armor. No, you draw the quiet ones, the ones with questions they don't know how to ask, the ones who don't yet know if they're looking for a master or a mirror. You don't teach them how to win. You teach them how to see, how to move with intent, how to watch the world without trying to control it. You teach them that strength is not about dominance, but about clarity. And above all, you teach them that the sword is not the path. It is the tool. The path is walked within. Some stay for weeks, some for years. Some leave without saying goodbye, their footsteps lost in the wind. You don't keep track. You're not building a school. You're passing on a rhythm. One morning, as you're carving a new bakken by the edge of a stream, a young man asks you, "Sensei, are you ever afraid?" You look up, not startled, not offended, just quiet. Then you set down the blade and say, "Every day, but I no longer fear the fear." The boy blinks, then smiles, and it's enough. You begin to sense the end before the body confirms it, a stiffness in your limbs, a weariness in the bones that no sleep can heal. Not weakness, not yet, but the first signs that the fire burns lower now, that the blade inside you has begun to cool. And you're not afraid. You've lived not just one life, but many. The wild child in the dirt, the ronin in the mist, the legend with blood on his hands, the wanderer with silence in his eyes, the teacher, the artist, each one its own death, its own birth. You sit alone one evening, watching the sun bleed into the mountains. A breeze stirs the trees. A bird cries out across the valley, and you take up the brush, this time with purpose, with finality. You begin the true work, not just of memory, but of legacy, and the words come slowly, heavy, clear. The way is in training. You must understand that there is more than one path to the top of the mountain. Do nothing which is of no use. You call it Go-Rin no-Sho, the Book of Five Rings. Not a manual, a mirror. For those who will come after, for those who still think the sword is the point. You write until the body begins to fail, and then, with ink-stained fingers and a heart finally still, you fold the last page closed. The wind rustles through the trees. You exhale, and for the first time, you do not reach for the sword. You simply let go. The rain begins before dawn. Not a storm, not violence, just a steady, whispering fall like the sky exhaling slowly. The kind of rain that softens the world, that dulls the edges of sound and thought, and makes everything feel like a memory. You sit beneath the eaves of a quiet temple, the hem of your robes already damp, your breath visible in the chill. Before you, the garden glistens, the stones and moss drinking in the gray light of morning. A single white blossom clings to a tree branch above you, trembling but unbroken. The final pages of your book lie open beside you, weighed down with a smooth river stone. Ink still drying. You don't need to reread them. You remember every word. They are not for you anymore. They never were. They're for those who will one day wonder who you were, and perhaps who they are. You feel the ache again, deep, not painful, but certain. The ache of something completing its arc, a circle closing. This is how it ends, you think. Not with a sword, not with a cry, not in the dirt and thunder of a battlefield, but in quiet, in clarity, in truth. You stand slowly. Every joint reminds you of time's passage. Every breath reminds you you're still here, but only just. You make your way down the path from the temple. It's the same path you've walked 100 times, maybe more. But today it feels different. Every pebble, every twisted root beneath your feet seems to hum with something sacred. Like the world knows, like it's holding its breath. At the edge of a field, you stop. A A child is crouched by the roadside playing with a piece of string. His face is smudged. His clothes are patched, but his eyes are bright, alive. He looks up as you approach. "Are you a monk?" he asks. You shake your head. "A samurai?" Another shake. He frowns, puzzled. "Then what are you?" You kneel, not out of weakness, but out of respect. And you smile, just barely. "I'm someone who kept walking." The child doesn't understand, not yet. But one day he might. You hand him the small wooden carving you've kept in your sleeve. A simple thing, a bird, mid-flight. You carved it weeks ago during a sleepless night, not knowing why. Now you do. He takes it without a word, as if it's the most natural thing in the world. You rise, turn, and continue walking. There is a cave not far from here, up the slope of Iwato Hill. You found it years ago, tucked behind a veil of stone and brush. A place forgotten by time. A place where the world grows quiet enough for truth to speak. That's where you go. One last journey. No servants, no banners, no audience. Only the path, only the rain. You arrive before nightfall. The cave mouth yawns open like an old friend waiting to receive you. Inside, it is cool and dry, the earth smooth from wind and years. You gather what little you brought, your writings, a few possessions, your wooden sword. You arrange them with care. Then you sit, cross-legged, spine straight, facing the entrance, where the last light of the day slants in through the trees, casting long, slow-moving shadows across the floor. You close your eyes, and you listen. To the wind, to the rain, to your breath. You are not afraid. You have walked the way. You have seen the enemy, not on the battlefield, but within. You have lost everything, and found something greater in its place. The world will remember you as a warrior, but you remember yourself as a student of motion, of silence, of life, and now of death. It does not come with violence. It does not come with fanfare. It comes like the final stroke of a calligrapher's brush, precise, still inevitable. You draw your last breath, and in that moment the storm outside quiets. A bird calls once from the trees, and somewhere, far below the cave, the boy with the carved wooden bird watches it fall from his fingers into a puddle, the ripples echoing outward. The cave remains silent long after you've gone. No one knows the exact hour of your death. There is no witness, no grand farewell. The world does not pause. The sun continues to rise. The rain dries on the branches. The breath of the forest returns to its rhythm. But inside that hollow in the hill, something ancient lingers. Not the man, but the presence he left behind. Your body, seated in stillness, remains upright for days, as if even death felt it inappropriate to disturb your final posture. Eventually, they find you. The monks, quiet and reverent, climb the slope in search of you when days pass without your return. They enter the cave not with fear, but with the solemnity of those who already understand what they are about to see. They do not speak. They do not cry. They bow, and then they carry you down, wrapped in simple cloth. No procession, no banners. Just the sound of sandals against stone, and a silence that weighs more than words. They bury you near the river's bend, not far from the temple, beneath a tree that had once offered you shade. The soil is soft. The roots reach deep, and when they cover you with earth, they place beside you only two things, your wooden sword and a worn copy of Gorin no Sho. For a time, the world moves on without you. Seasons pass. The Tokugawa regime grows stronger. The age of war fades into a quieter tyranny. The sword, once the heartbeat of the nation, begins to lose its place. Steel gives way to scrolls. Violence gives way to etiquette. The samurai become civil servants, poets, governors. Their blades polished, unused, symbolic. Their honor defined less by blood and more by the laws of a newly rigid society. And your name becomes legend. First whispered, then studied, then recited in halls where your sword would never have been welcome. They speak of your duels, 33 in all, undefeated. They marvel at your strange techniques, your two-sword style, your unpredictable movement, your refusal to fight on anyone else's terms. They write essays. They debate your philosophy. They paint portraits of you, some noble, some wild, all imaginary. The man disappears. The myth takes root. Children grow up hearing your name not as history, but as fable. They speak of your duel with Sasaki Kojiro, as if it were thunder meeting tide, as if you stepped onto Ganryu Island not in human flesh, but as some stormwalker born of wind and will. They forget the rain that morning, the silence, the ache in your bones. They forget the fear. But the book remains, passed from hand to hand, translated, reinterpreted, worn by time and fingers and minds trying to understand what you truly meant. Some read it as a manual of war. Others, the wiser ones, understand it's not about killing. It never was. It's about perception, about discipline, about standing still long enough to see the shape of truth moving through chaos. It's about learning when to strike and when to walk away. Years become centuries. The world you knew crumbles. Castles fall, swords are outlawed. The empire fractures, then reforms. One war ends, another begins. Machines replace men. The air grows louder, the pace quicker, the silence more rare. But still, there are those who find your words. Soldier in a trench shaking finds strength in your calm. A business leader in a glass tower facing ruin reads your lines and feels the storm inside him settle. A martial artist in a distant land, barefoot in a wooden dojo, bows before a portrait of a man he's never met, but somehow knows. They do not see your face, but they hear your voice in the quiet between moments. The way is in training. Think lightly of yourself and deeply of the world. You must understand that there is more than one path. Your grave becomes a place of pilgrimage, not because it's grand, it isn't, but because the ones who find it understand what kind of man lies beneath the moss and stone. A man who sought not glory, but clarity. A man who won not because he was stronger, but because he saw more clearly than anyone else. A man who walked alone, but not aimlessly. They leave tokens, swords, coins, brush pens, pieces of paper with ink still wet. They bow, not to a warrior, but to a seeker, and the wind stirs through the tall grass as if whispering the only epitaph you ever needed. He walked away. The shrine is quiet in winter. Snow gathers on the rooftops in pale, deliberate folds. Icicles hang from the eaves like frozen prayers. Beneath it all, the earth sleeps. The world speaks in hushes. The crunch of sandals on frost-bitten stone. The breath of monks rising like incense in the morning air. The occasional creak of old wood adjusting to the cold. And still they come, one by one or in small groups. Some travel miles, others live nearby. Most say nothing. They bow before the stone. They lay down their offerings. And then they stand there, silently, as if waiting to hear something only they can understand. Your name has grown larger than your life and smaller too. For some, you are a ghost. A shadow from a blood-soaked era, admired and feared but safely distant. For others, you are a master, the architect of a path they still try to follow, blade in hand or not. But for a few, a quiet few, you are a mirror. They read your words late at night, not to learn how to strike an enemy, but how to silence the ones that live inside themselves. They walk in empty fields with your voice echoing in their chest, not because they wish to be warriors, but because they wish to understand how to move through the world without being moved by it. And these are the ones who see you most clearly, not the legend, not the duelist, but the man, the child covered in dust, the teenager with rage in his hands and no one to teach him where to place it, the wanderer on muddy roads, starving, sick, unsure if the next duel would be his last, the swordsman who won, and then spent the rest of his life trying to understand what that victory truly meant. You weren't born a sage. You became one. Through failure, through pain, through distance, through time. That's what they rarely understand. That the Book of Five Rings wasn't written from the top of a mountain. It was carved slowly from the bone and scar tissue of a life lived with complete, relentless intensity. And most of it was quiet. Not the battles, not the famous fights, but the walks. The ink, the breath between strikes. You wrote of fire, earth, wind, water, and void, but not as elements, as metaphors, for discipline, for adaptability, for freedom, for flow, and finally is for emptiness, the void, the most misunderstood of them all. You didn't mean nothingness in the Western sense. You meant the place beyond form, beyond thought, beyond self, that sacred silence where things are seen, not merely known. That space in the center of the storm, where the sword moves not by will but by inevitability. That's what you gave the world. Not technique, not fame, stillness. In a world that never stops screaming, one monk older than most returns every season. He never speaks, just sits cross-legged by your grave, his hands resting gently on his knees, eyes half-lidded. Sometimes he hums a single note. Sometimes he just listens. They say he once lived as a samurai, long ago, fought many battles, buried many friends. Now he simply breathes. He does not call himself a follower. He does not claim to know your teachings better than others. But he is here. Always. In snow, in rain, in spring's sudden burst of cherry blossoms. He is here. Because he understands the one lesson even your most devoted readers sometimes miss. Victory is not the goal. Peace is. Not the peace of surrender, but the peace of understanding, of knowing what to hold and what to let go. A young boy watches the monk one afternoon, his sandals scuffed, a practice bakken slung over one shoulder. His master told him to study your ways. So he came here, expecting to find answers in stone. But he finds only silence. He waits a long time, fidgets, clears his throat. Finally, the monk turns to him and asks, "Why are you here?" The boy looks down, to learn how to win. The monk's eyes soften, but his voice is steady. "Then come back when you're ready to lose." The boy doesn't understand. Not yet. But the seed is planted. And someday, when he's older, when his hands have known pain, when his name has known praise, when he sat alone by rivers and questioned every decision that brought him there, he'll return. Not to win, not to fight, but to understand. And in that moment you'll whisper to him through the trees, as you do to all who truly seek you. Cutting down one man is nothing. Seeing through yourself, that is everything. He never speaks, just sits cross-legged by your grave, his hands resting gently on his knees, eyes half-lidded. Sometimes he hums a single note. Sometimes he just listens. They say he once lived as a samurai, long ago, fought many battles, buried many friends. Now he simply breathes. He does not call himself a follower. He does not claim to know your teachings better than others. But he is here. Always. In snow, in rain, in spring's sudden burst of cherry blossoms. He is here. Because he understands the one lesson even your most devoted readers sometimes miss. Victory is not the goal. Peace is. Not the peace of surrender, but the peace of understanding, of knowing what to hold and what to let go. A young boy watches the monk one afternoon, his sandals scuffed, a practice bakken slung over one shoulder. His master told him to study your ways. So he came here, expecting to find answers in stone. But he finds only silence. He waits a long time, fidgets, clears his throat. Finally, the monk turns to him and asks, "Why are you here?" The boy looks down, to learn how to win. The monk's eyes soften, but his voice is steady. "Then come back when you're ready to lose." The boy doesn't understand. Not yet. But the seed is planted. And someday, when he's older, when his hands have known pain, when his name has known praise, when he sat alone by rivers and questioned every decision that brought him there, he'll return. Not to win, not to fight, but to understand. And in that moment you'll whisper to him through the trees, as you do to all who truly seek you. Cutting down one man is nothing. Even the stones remember you. They sit buried along old roads you once walked, worn smooth by centuries, but still echoing faintly with the weight of your steps. Beneath moss, beneath soil, beneath the feet of those who pass unaware, they hold the imprint of a life moved by stillness and guided by instinct. There is a bridge outside of Kyoto, weathered, half forgotten. It crosses a narrow stream no one pays much attention to. The wood is warped, the railings lean. Travelers pass over it thinking only of their errands, food, money, shelter. But some feel it. A shift in the air, a quiet ripple through the spine. Because one night long ago, under moonlight silver enough to pierce bone, you crossed that bridge and did not look back. You were 27 then, already a legend in whispers, already blood on your hands, some deserved, some not. The duel with Kojiro had made you famous, but fame is a cold thing. It keeps no one warm. It feeds nothing of the soul. You walked not to chase glory, but to flee from it. People had begun to expect things of you, to challenge you not because they sought truth, but because they wanted your name to make theirs louder. So you walked into the wilderness, away from the dojos, the cities, the fires, away from the noise. You wandered forests that hadn't seen men in years, slept under trees older than the shogunate, lived on wild roots and whatever the river gave freely. Your body thinned, your vision sharpened. The sword at your side became less like a weapon and more like a shadow, always there but no longer needing to be drawn. You began to understand something no battlefield had ever taught you, that the greatest duels happen inside silence. You practiced alone, in the cold, at dawn, in the rain. You swung your wooden blade not at enemies, but at the invisible tensions in your own body, the places where fear lived, where doubt nested, where ambition whispered too sweetly. And slowly, stroke by stroke, you began to cut through it all. There was no applause, no students, just you, and the rhythm, and the wind. That's when you started to write, not as a master, but as someone still trying to understand what mastery even meant. The brush felt strange in your hand at first. It lacked the weight of a sword, the resistance of flesh and bone. But in time, you learned that ink could cut just as deep. You wrote not to teach, not yet, but to remember, to anchor moments that might otherwise drift away like smoke. You wrote down forms, thoughts, dreams, observations. You wrote to survive the solitude. And then one day, a farmer found you asleep beneath an old cedar tree. He was cautious. You were dirty, gaunt, your robe torn at the hem, but your presence was undeniable. Not because you looked like a samurai, but because you didn't look like anything else. You were something other. He offered you food. You nodded once. He led you to a village, hesitant but kind. The people were poor, the fields rough, the children thin, but they welcomed you. Not as a warrior, as a helper. You repaired roofs, dug trenches, taught young boys how to swing a stick without breaking their wrists. You never told them who you were, but word spread anyway. It always does, and so they came. One at first, then 3, then dozens. Young men, old men, some proud, some broken. They came with swords, with questions. You didn't give them answers. You gave them chores. Fetch water, stack stones, carry silence. Some left frustrated, others stayed. And those who stayed, truly stayed, began to see that the sword wasn't about winning, that it was about knowing. Knowing yourself when the world goes quiet, knowing how your weight shifts on uneven ground, knowing how not to flinch, how not to reach, how not to want. You taught them form, then you taught them formlessness. And when they asked what to call you, you said only, a student. They didn't believe you, but the best ones understood. Your camp became a kind of ghost school. No sign, no name, no enrollment. Just a place people arrived when they had nowhere else to go, or when the life they had wasn't enough. And in the evenings, after the fire dimmed and the cicadas sang, you sat alone with your ink and paper, refining the lines, sharpening the philosophy, distilling blood into wisdom, not because you sought followers, but because somewhere deep down you understood the truth. A swordmaster dies twice, first when his blade stills, then when his teachings are forgotten. You would not let the second death come easily. You carved your life into words, so that someday someone could find them, and remember how to walk through chaos with grace, how to lose without being broken, how to fight without hatred, how to live without fear, how to die without regret. The wind returns each spring, as if retracing your footsteps. It slides over the old paths where you once walked barefoot, stirring the tall grass, bending the reeds by the river. It doesn't speak loudly. It never did. But those who know how to listen can still hear its message. He was here. He moved through this world, and the world remembers. In a village you once visited, the name now changed, the fields long gone. An old woman burns incense by a tree that grew near the place where you once slept. She doesn't know your full story, only pieces. A face remembered in childhood. A man with kind eyes and rough hands who taught her brother how to hold a stick like it mattered. She thinks of you when the air gets cold. She tells her grandson that the man who lived in the forest had a soul made of still water, deep, calm, and capable of drowning anything. She lights the incense and closes her eyes. She whispers a name. Not Musashi, just the swordsman. Elsewhere, a scholar in Edo finds an old scroll, brittle, faint, and nearly illegible, containing a passage that stuns him. He reads it again and again. There is timing in everything. Timing in strategy cannot be mastered without a great deal of practice. It stops him cold, because he realizes this isn't about battle at all. It's about life, how we speak too soon or too late, how we rush love, how we delay truth, how we miss the opening. Not because we're blind, but because we're too noisy inside to feel it. That sentence alone undoes him. He copies it down, carries it with him, folds it into his coat like a blade. He begins to live differently, not because of any religion, not because of any duty, but because a man who once killed without hesitation had written something so still, so precise, that it pierced through the chaos of a scholar's mind and left him breathless. That's what your words do. They linger. Not in libraries, not in halls, but in people. You weren't trying to leave a legacy. That's what makes yours unshakable. You were trying to understand what it meant to be, to move rightly, to see clearly, to walk through a violent, unpredictable world without becoming violent and unpredictable yourself. The more you stripped away, possessions, attachments, illusions, the closer you got to something most men never even touch. Freedom. Not the freedom of choice, but the freedom of clarity. You weren't chained by fear or anger or longing. You didn't chase recognition. You chased formlessness, the state where action and intent dissolve, where you simply become what the moment requires. A sword when necessary, a silence when not. Your later years, when the body began to stiffen and the grip weakened, you smiled more. You had fewer visitors. Those who came often expected grandeur. They were surprised by the quiet, the cracked tea bowl, the way you asked more questions than you answered. A young samurai once asked you, "Master, what is the true path?" You looked at him a long time. Then you stood, walked outside, and pointed to the sky. The clouds were moving. That was your answer, because the truth wasn't something you could hand to someone. It was something they had to walk toward, lose sight of, then find again. Like a path in the mountains, like the breath between two strikes, like the silence before the first step into a duel. You had known many kinds of death, the death of enemies, the death of friends, the slow death of innocence. But you never feared your own, because you'd already died once, the day you stopped seeking victory, and from that death came your life, in full, unshackled. And now, all these years later, long after the last drop of ink dried and the final bow was drawn, your presence still flickers behind closed eyes. A man meditating hears a breath that isn't his. A fighter in a distant ring feels your calm before the bell. A writer, trembling with doubt, channels your stillness into her pen. They don't call you by name. They don't need to. You are the space between thought and action, the pause between question and answer, the deep, clear water that reflects all who dare to look into it. And for those who look long enough, you look back. The cave was quiet, not silent. No place in nature is truly silent, but quiet in that sacred, reverent way the world becomes when it knows it is being watched by something still. The wind didn't whistle here. It sighed. Birds didn't call. They whispered from distant trees. The cave mouth, a jagged hollow in the mountain's ribs, opened like a breath held too long. And inside, you sat, alone, not out of bitterness, not out of fear, but because solitude was the last teacher left. It was the year 1643. You were nearing 60. Your joints ached in the mornings. Your grip was no longer what it had been. But your gaze could still cut through illusion like steel through silk. This place, Reigondo, the Spirit Rock Caves, this was no grand temple, no fortress, just earth and stone and shadow. But it had what you needed. Distance. From the world. From noise. From the endless clamor of names, ambitions, challenges, and praise. All things that had, in time, proven to be distractions from the deeper duel, the one between self and self. You brought with you only what was essential: brush, ink, paper, water, a simple blade, not to fight but to remind you who you'd been, and your thoughts, vast and unfinished, swirling like smoke inside the cavern of your mind. The Book of Five Rings was not born quickly. It was a slow unspooling. Each word pulled gently from memory, from observation, from wounds you'd learned how to read. You weren't writing a manual for swordsmanship, though many would believe that's what it was. You were recording how to live. Not in comfort, not in certainty, but in awareness. You began with earth, the solid, unshakable ground beneath all things, the form, the discipline, the footwork, the foundation. Then water, fluid, adaptable, able to slip through fingers or crash against stone. Strategy must be like water, unresisting, but impossible to grasp. Then fire, the spark, the clash. The moment steel meets steel, not anger, never that, but presence. That raw, undeniable now that fills the lungs when everything is at stake. Wind, not just breath, but the styles of others. Their voices, their movements, knowing them without becoming them. Learning without imitation, listening without absorption, and finally, void. The chapter you hesitated over. Because how does one write about the ungraspable? How do you speak of the moment where thought disappears and the sword moves without intention? Not by will, but by necessity. But you did, carefully, in strokes so sparse they might be mistaken for riddles. Yet beneath them, a weight, a silence. By knowing things that exist, you can know that which does not exist. To most, that was nonsense. But you weren't speaking to most. You were writing to those who had walked as far from the noise as you had, who had lost everything unnecessary, and found in that absence a clarity too pure for words. Sometimes you paused. You would set the brush down, walk out of the cave, and sit on the rocks that overlooked the valley. Watch clouds pass. Watch shadows crawl across the mountains like old ghosts. And you would remember every duel, every road, every night you slept with the sword drawn beside you, because you didn't know if you'd see the morning. You remembered the young boy, wild, angry, confused, who once ran barefoot through the dirt of Miyamoto village, fists clenched and soul burning for something he couldn't name. And now he sat here, a man, and maybe more. One day, a boy from the nearby village came to bring you food. He lingered outside the cave, peeking in. He expected to see something grand, or terrible, or magical. But he saw an old man with ink-stained fingers, lost in thought, eyes soft with exhaustion and some kind of strange, heavy peace. The boy asked, "Are you the great warrior Musashi?" You didn't answer. Instead, you smiled, gently, as if the question itself was a bird you didn't want to scare off. And then you said, "I am a mirror." The boy didn't understand, but he never forgot it. Years later, he would tell others, and they would tell others. And the words would change, of course, become stories, myths, then fables. But somewhere in all those retellings, the truth would remain. You weren't trying to be remembered. You were trying to see yourself clearly before the end came. And in doing so, you left behind something more powerful than legend. You left behind a way. The cave began to grow colder. The night stretched longer, as if the world was beginning to slow with you. Time no longer moved in hours or days. It moved in breaths, in ink drying, in footsteps echoing against stone. You felt the edges of your body more acutely now, the stiffness in your fingers, the tremor that sometimes passed through your hand like a breeze through branches. But you did not curse it. You welcomed it, because age, like the sword, was just another teacher. In the stillness of Reigondo, you began to listen to your body the way you once listened to your enemies. Not with fear, but with respect. Every ache was a messenger. Every weakness, an invitation to let go of what no longer served you. And yet your mind, sharper than ever. Your thoughts came like moonlight through leaves, soft but revealing everything. The book was nearly finished, its pages now heavy with something deeper than knowledge. They held the residue of a life hard-earned. You were writing less now, not because you lacked the words, but because you were beginning to see that most of what needed to be said had already been carved into the silence between the lines. You found yourself watching shadows more often than wielding a brush, noticing how they moved along the stone wall, slowly, inevitably, changing shape as the sun crawled across the sky. There was beauty in that simplicity, a lesson in impermanence. That even stone gives way to time, even warriors. Sometimes you spoke aloud to the cave, Not to hear your own voice, but because there were no students left nearby, no rivals, no challengers. And yet, teaching still pressed against the inside of your chest like a tide rising. So you whispered them to the stone. If you rely on technique alone, you will falter. The way of the warrior is the way of acceptance. Strike when the heart is still, not when the mind is loud. The cave listened, and perhaps it understood. You carved a few words into the wall near where you slept. Not a name, not a record, just a phrase. Yuri no michi wa tada shizuka ni aru. The true path lies only in stillness. You believe that now more than ever. Because the battles you once fought, the flashing steel, the falling bodies, they had faded, blurred at the edges. What remained were the moments before the clash, the breath, the awareness, the choice not to flinch. That's where your real victories had always lived. A messenger came one morning. He knelt at the mouth of the cave, respectful, cautious. You were thinner now. Your robe was patched at the sleeves. But your eyes, they still held something no rank, no title could ever command. He brought word from Lord Hosokawa. They wanted to see you once more. A final meeting, perhaps to honor you, perhaps to understand you. You nodded, and for the first time in many months you left the cave. You moved slowly, but each step was deliberate, clean, grounded. Villagers bowed as you passed. Not out of fear, but reverence. The way one bows to a storm that has become sky. A sword that has become memory. At the Hosokawa estate, they treated you like a sage. Servants offered you fine food, soft cushions, silk robes. You accepted little. What you wanted was not comfort, it was clarity. And so, as the days passed, you did what you had always done. You taught, but not with drills or sparring matches. You taught with presence, with stories told by the firelight, with silences that stretched long enough to make students feel the shape of their own restlessness. One night, a young retainer asked, "Master, how should we face death?" You studied him, and replied, "Face it the way you face your own shadow, not with fear, not with pride, but with acknowledgement." Another asked, "What should we strive for above all?" You said nothing for a long while. Then you picked up your brush and wrote a single word. Oh, emptiness. Not nihilism, not despair, but the fullness of release, the absence of clinging, the space where form dissolves and essence remains. The younger samurai didn't fully understand, but they knew they had witnessed something rare. Not the end of a warrior's life, but the distillation of it. And soon after, you returned to the cave. There was one last task. A scroll. Unlike the Book of Five Rings, this one was more intimate, more final. A document of parting, not from students, but from the world itself. You named it Dokodo, the way of walking alone. 21 precepts, no elaboration, no justifications, just a path, plain, unadorned, sharp as a blade. Accept everything just the way it is. Do not seek pleasure for its own sake. Do not fear death. Each line a cut-through illusion, each line a quiet truth you had bled to learn. You wrote it with steady hand. Then you folded the scroll, set it beside your sword, and lay down, not as a warrior preparing for battle, but as a man who had finally come home, to the self, to stillness, to peace, and the cave, the mountain, the wind. They held you, just as you were, and always had been. The night you wrote the Dokodo, the sky was cloudless. Stars hung above Reigando like 1,000 unspoken questions. Cold air drifted in through the cave's mouth, carrying with it the scent of moss and rain-soaked earth. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called out, low, deliberate, like a bell marking the hour of final things. You had finished? Not your life, though that too was near. You had finished your transmission. Everything you had learned, through wounds, through silence, through motion, now lived outside of you, in ink, in paper, in the hands of those who would carry it forward, whether they understood it or not. The Dokodo was not a list of commandments. It was a mirror, each line reflecting a different face of your truth, some harsh, some simple, some that would take years for others to grasp, if they ever could. Resentment and complaint are appropriate neither for oneself nor others. Be indifferent to where you live. Do not collect weapons or practice with weapons beyond what is useful. Even now, as your body grew thin and your bones sat closer to the surface, Your mind remained clear. No fear in your breath. No trembling in your purpose. You were walking toward the end as you had walked toward every duel. Awake, alert, and empty of hesitation. The scroll lay folded beside your bedroll. By candlelight, its edges glowed faintly, a quiet relic, a sword made of sentences. You didn't sign it with flourish. You didn't add a title. You didn't call yourself master. Just Musashi, the name you had carried through countless battlegrounds. The name whispered by survivors. The name that had slowly, over the years, become less of a person and more of a principle. You blew out the candle, and for a moment the cave was swallowed in blackness. Not the darkness of fear, but of completion. You did not sleep. You simply rested, eyes open, listening, to the wind, to the slow rhythm of your own pulse, to the soundless voice that had been with you all your life, the voice that had whispered behind your thoughts, guiding your hand, stilling your blade. A few days passed. Your body grew lighter. You stopped eating, not by decision, but because hunger no longer came. There was no urgency, only breath, only silence. Your final visitor arrived quietly, the retainer from Hosokawa, a man you had once taught briefly years ago. He stood at the edge of the cave, unsure whether to enter. You turned your head toward him, gestured for him to sit, and together you shared no words. There was no need. He looked at your face, now lean as a cliffside, eyes shadowed but alive with something deeper than vitality. He bowed low, and as he rose, tears touched the edges of his vision. You did not tell him to be strong. You did not offer a final lesson. Instead, you lifted one hand, slow, steady, and pointed toward the far wall of the cave, toward the carving. Yuri no michi wa tada shizuka ni aru. The true path lies only in stillness. He nodded and left. Outside, spring had just begun to press its thumbprint onto the valley. Buds pushed up through last year's dead grass. Trees shook off their sleep. The river, swollen from meltwater, hummed a quiet song down below. Inside the cave, the air was still. You lay back, hands resting on your chest. Not in prayer, you had never prayed, but in ease. No enemies to guard against, no students to instruct, no expectations to uphold. Just you, a boy once lost in the mud of Miyamoto village, a young man covered in blood at the Battle of Sekigahara, a warrior wandering mountain paths with fire in his eyes, an artist sketching hawks with a brush as delicate as breath. And now this, a body returning to the earth, a silence opening like a door, and through it only light. You did not speak in your final moments. There was no need to name what you had become, because you were no longer walking the path alone. You were becoming the path itself. Outside the cave, dawn came with the gentlest kind of sorrow. The sun didn't rise in brilliance that morning. It crept slowly, as if reluctant to cast its light on a world that had just become a little emptier. Mist curled along the valley like a breath withheld. Birds did not sing immediately. Even the wind, which usually whispered through the trees at Reigando's edge, held its voice a little longer. Inside, your body had already begun to cool. There was no drama, no final gasp, no last words etched into the stone. Just stillness, as if you had melted into the very mountain that sheltered you. A return so seamless, even death felt like an illusion. When they came to carry you, they did so quietly. Servants of the Hosokawa, disciples, villagers who had once glimpsed your shadow against the fading light. They arrived not as mourners, but as witnesses. Witnesses to something larger than grief. They found your final scroll beside your body, the dokodo, its paper worn at the corners. Your swords were neatly placed, not in reach, not in defiance, but in acknowledgement. Companions to a life now complete. No one wept loudly. They did not need to, because grief, when it comes from reverence, doesn't always need tears. Instead, they knelt, each in turn, and bowed, not to a legend, not to a myth, but to a man who had walked further into himself than most ever dare. A man who had died not in combat, not by illness or flame, but by choice. Quietly, fully, in alignment with every word he had ever spoken. They wrapped you in white cloth, not ceremonial, just enough to return you to the earth with dignity. And as they carried you down from Reigando, the wind finally stirred. It moved through the trees, through their robes, through the folds of time itself. Some later said it sounded like your breath, exhaled one last time into the world. Others said it whispered your name, Musashi. Not shouted, whispered, as if the mountain itself was remembering you. Your body was cremated with reverence, your ashes interred beneath the stone marker at Musashizuka. A small place, humble, no towering statues, no sprawling monuments, just a stone, a name, and beside it, one of your swords. The rest was silence, but your legacy did not end there, because long after your bones returned to dust, your teachings remained. The Book of 5 Rings traveled far, copied by hand, passed between warriors, merchants, philosophers, carried across oceans, translated, misinterpreted, revered, forgotten, rediscovered. Each generation found something different in it. To the soldier, it was strategy. To the monk, it was detachment. To the artist, it was flow. And to the seeker, the one who read between the lines, who listened for the silences, it was a mirror, polished smooth by your life. A few decades later, men would speak your name with awe. They would tell stories of the undefeated swordsman who fought over 60 duels and never lost. They would paint images of you with wild hair, wooden sword in hand, fire in your eyes. They would mythologize you, because that's what we do with those we can't quite understand. We turn them into legends, so we don't have to feel the ache of their humanity. But somewhere, buried beneath the tales and the titles, the truth remained. You were not trying to become immortal. You were trying to become whole, and wholeness once attained cannot die. Your scrolls now sit behind glass in Tokyo, studied by scholars. Your name is etched into countless books, quoted by CEOs and martial artists alike. But none of it captures what you truly were. A man who walked alone, not in loneliness but in discipline, in clarity, in quiet defiance of a world too loud with false promises. You walked the edge of life like it was a blade, and when your steps finally stopped, they left behind not footprints, but a path. Narrow. Outside the cave, dawn came with the gentlest kind of sorrow. The sun didn't rise in brilliance that morning. It crept slowly, as if reluctant to cast its light on a world that had just become a little emptier. Mist curled along the valley like a breath withheld. Birds did not sing immediately. Even the wind, which usually whispered through the trees at Reigando's edge, held its voice a little longer. Inside, your body had already begun to cool. There was no drama, no final gasp, no last words etched into the stone. Just stillness, as if you had melted into the very mountain that sheltered you. A return so seamless, even death felt like an illusion. When they came to carry you, they did so quietly. Servants of the Hosokawa, disciples, villagers who had once glimpsed your shadow against the fading light. They arrived not as mourners, but as witnesses. Witnesses to something larger than grief. They found your final scroll beside your body. The dokodo, its paper worn at the corners. Your swords were neatly placed, not in reach, not in defiance, but in acknowledgement. Companions to a life now complete. No one wept loudly. They did not need to, because grief, when it comes from reverence, doesn't always need tears. Instead, they knelt, each in turn, and bowed, not to a legend, not to a myth, but to a man who had walked further into himself than most ever dare. A man who had died not in combat, not by illness or flame, but by choice. Quietly, fully, in alignment with every word he had ever spoken. They wrapped you in white cloth, not ceremonial, just enough to return you to the earth with dignity. And as they carried you down from Reigando, the wind finally stirred. It moved through the trees, through their robes, through the folds of time itself. Some later said it sounded like your breath, exhaled one last time into the world. Others said it whispered your name, Musashi. Not shouted, whispered, as if the mountain itself was remembering you. Your body was cremated with reverence, your ashes interred beneath the stone marker at Musashizuka. A small place, humble, no towering statues, no sprawling monuments, just a stone, a name, and beside it, one of your swords. Just a sentence. Thank you for showing me how to walk forward. Then he turned and disappeared down the path just as you once did. Somewhere in a world now lit by screens and silenced by noise, someone else read your book. On a train, in a dojo, in a hospital bed. And they too found something in it. Not answers, but direction. And so your steps continued, through pages, through practice, through people. Not in glory, but in grit. Not in celebration, but in stillness. You did not chase immortality, Musashi, and that is precisely why it found you. Winter came again to Reigando. The trees, now bare, stood like patient sentinels along the ridgeline. Snow drifted in slow, weightless spirals, collecting on stone, on branches, on the worn trail leading to your cave. The same trail your feet once knew by memory. The same one others now walked in soft, reverent silence. A thin frost crusted the cave mouth, but inside, stillness remained untouched. No shrine, no candles, no flowers, just cold stone and quiet shadows the way you left it. Outside, the modern world turned, indifferent, insistent. Planes groaned across the sky like metal birds. Cities sprawled, nations negotiated, screens glowed through every window. But within that timeless hollow, your absence still hummed like a presence. Even in forgetting, you were remembered. Not because of ceremony, but because of rhythm, because people kept returning to your rhythm. Not just your victories, not just your teachings, but the way you moved through life. The spaces between your actions, the long pauses between your words. In the West, your story took on new forms. Your name, once strange on foreign tongues, found its way into boardrooms, battlefields, cinema scripts. They studied your strategies like equations, turning your swordplay into metaphors for business, for war, for life. They underlined phrases in the Book of 5 Rings without always understanding that those words were born not from theory, but from blood, from hunger, from exile, from solitude so vast it echoed. They missed the silences between the lines. But not all of them. Some listened closer. A martial artist in São Paulo, barefoot on an aging mat, breathed in your rhythm with each kata. He didn't try to copy you. He simply tried to understand his own shadow through yours. A painter in Berlin read your book in a cold loft, brush poised in midair, trying to capture the moment before movement, the stillness you wrote of, the uncarved stroke. And in that pause before paint touched canvas, she felt you. A solitary student in Cairo, sitting cross-legged by a dim lamp, repeated your lines aloud, not as doctrine, but as prayer, as if saying them might anchor him in a world too easily pulled apart. And in every one of them, in every breath, every motion, every moment of hesitation sharpened into intention, you continued. Not as a ghost, not as a relic, but as a rhythm, because the way you lived was not linear. It did not march in time like a drumbeat. It flowed. It turned. It doubled back. It disappeared into forests, into pages, into scars, and then re-emerged in gestures, in silence, in people who had never held a sword but still felt the weight of one in their hands when they read your words. To know 10,000 things, know one thing well. You knew the one thing, not killing, not even swordplay, but presence. Real presence, the kind forged by facing fear with your eyes open, by losing without explanation, by choosing simplicity over indulgence, solitude over applause. It was not the sword that made you dangerous. It was the clarity, the absence of flinch, the absolute refusal to lie to yourself. Even as your legend spread, even as statues were carved and pages filled, your truest teaching never changed. It was never about victory. It was about alignment, and alignment once found reshapes everything. Across time zones, across languages, the cave remains, sometimes empty, sometimes filled with quiet footsteps. A child once left a paper crane there. No one took it. The wind slowly folded its wings inward. Maybe that was fitting. You never asked for tribute, you asked for truth. And truth, like the path, remains narrow and rarely crowded. But somewhere right now, as this story unfolds, someone is sitting alone, somewhere in the quiet, thinking not about battles or fame or legacy, but about how to live. And in that thought, you rise again. Far from the cave, beyond the valleys of Kyushu and the rivers you once followed barefoot, the world no longer looks the way it did when you breathed your last. Concrete has covered many of the old trails. Neon burns where firelight once flickered, and the clatter of wooden sandals has long been replaced by the hollow buzz of passing trains. But beneath it all, and under the asphalt and ambition, your footprints still remain. They're not always visible, not literal, but felt, in the way a teacher pauses before speaking, in the way a craftsman places his tool on the table with care, not out of habit, but in acknowledgement, in the silent inhale before a decision is made. Those who walk your path now rarely call themselves swordsmen. They might never lift a blade, but they know your teachings. They feel your voice in their bones, not because it commands, but because it questions. Always questioning. What is the way? What is the self? Can you see clearly, even when your hands shake? And for those who truly listen, the way is not a set of answers, but a mirror. It reflects who you are and who you pretend to be. In Kyoto, a monk tends a garden you never walked through. He rakes the gravel into precise patterns, knowing the wind will undo it by morning. But that's not the point. The point is to rake anyway, to meet the impermanence without resistance. In New York, a young boxer laces his gloves with trembling fingers. His trainer hands him a dog-eared copy of your book, tells him to read the second chapter again. Water. The boy doesn't understand it all yet, but he keeps reading. Because in your words, he hears something familiar. A man talking to himself in the dark, asking, "Am I ready to face what's inside me?" In Osaka, a woman prepares tea for no one but herself. She moves slowly, intentionally, the way you used to walk into a duel, not with fear, not with pride, just presence. She places the cup down with both hands and says nothing. But the room listens. These aren't followers. They are fragments, pieces of your spirit scattered across time, each one carrying a single ember of the fire you lit, not to keep warm, but to see. Your books are now printed in dozens of languages. Some treat them like manuals, others like scripture. Some miss the point entirely. But here and there, a few understand. A few feel the deeper current beneath your technique. Because the greatest of your teachings was never the how, it was the why. It may seem difficult at first, but everything is difficult at first. Those words live inside the ones who have lost and still rise. Inside the ones who walk away from comfort, from applause, from certainty, because something deeper calls, something silent, something wild. The way, your way, the irony, Musashi, the strange, quiet irony, is that the more people speak your name, the more you vanish from the noise. You are not found in the fame. You are found in the moments between choices, in the breath before the strike, in the hand that chooses not to strike at all. And so the years go on, and the world spins forward. And yet, still, somewhere, in a quiet room, someone closes your book, sets it down on the floor beside them, and sits with their back straight and their mind still, not waiting, not chasing, just listening to something older than thought, to the part of themselves that cannot be distracted, cannot be bought, cannot be bent by fear. And in that stillness, that exact moment of unshaken presence, you live again, not as memory, not as myth, but as movement, as still water in a hidden pool, unseen by most, but always there. Time, like a river, carries everything forward, stones, leaves, names, and wears down even the sharpest edges. But some names resist that soft erosion, not because they're carved louder into the world, but because they echo deeper. Yours is one of them, not loud, not bright, but constant. Miyamoto Musashi, the man, the blade, the ghost. Your name isn't spoken now in courts or shouted across battlefields. It's whispered, passed hand to hand like a secret. A name that asks something of the speaker, a weight to carry, a standard to rise to. Because once someone truly understands the way, they cannot pretend they do not know it. Even if they fall short, even if they struggle, the knowing changes them. And change, as you well knew, does not come easily. The truth is, you were not beloved in your time. You were feared, respected, studied, but rarely embraced. You didn't smile for portraits. You didn't bend your knee to lords or soften your truth for the comfort of others. You walked away, again and again, from offers, from wealth, from homes, even from kin, because you understood something that few ever do. Clarity often demands isolation. And freedom, real freedom, has a cost. They called you a Ronin, but you were more than that. You were a mirror no one wanted to look into for long. Even now, your reflection makes people uncomfortable. Not because of what you were, but because of what you weren't. You weren't tame. You weren't branded. You weren't waiting for permission to live your truth. And that kind of presence is rare, so people try to capture it. Museums hang swords and paint your duels with thick brushstrokes, as if by owning the object they might contain the spirit. But you cannot be kept behind glass. You weren't made to be observed. You were made to move, to live like water, to fight like wind, to die like fire, and in the stillness that follows to become something like stone, not cold but eternal. Even the cave, your last chosen place of breath, resists becoming a shrine. It remains bare, hard, silent, because that's how you lived, stripped of decoration, free from performance, a man alone with his mind and the sound of a brush on paper. In the final pages of your book, your words slow. They grow sparer, less about form, more about formlessness. As if, nearing the end, you wanted to leave not instructions, but space. Space for the reader to meet themselves. Because that was always the true duel. Not steel against steel, but self against self. And who among us dares to stand fully in that ring? Who has the courage to face not the world's judgment, but their own? The world will always offer distractions, pride, politics, profit. But beneath it all, something quieter waits. A pulse, a rhythm, the way. You did not create it. You merely followed it farther than most. Far enough to see where it led, and you gave us a map, not a destination. A rhythm, not a rule. A question, not an answer. What is the true meaning of the way? You asked, and then you listened. That was your final lesson, that silence is not emptiness. It is readiness. It is presence. It is the moment before all things move. And in that moment, that breathless hush between thought and action, the soul becomes still, and the way becomes clear. So now, here we are, at the end of the path, or maybe just where the path disappears into mist. We've walked beside you, Musashi, from the muddy fields of Miyamoto village to the blood-wet dueling grounds of ancient Japan, from your first trembling grip on a wooden sword to the final still silence of Rei Gondo. We've seen the violence, yes, the glory, the duels that shattered reputations and echoed through time. But more than that, we felt the weight of solitude, the ache of discipline, the quiet fire of a man who refused to be owned. You lived without a master and died without regret. And what you left behind was not a trail of conquest. It was a way for those brave enough to stop chasing, stop hiding, and simply face themselves. Because in the end, that was the real battlefield. Not the fields of Sekigahara, not the island shores of Ganryu, but the space between who we are and who we pretend to be. And if your life taught us anything, it's that mastery isn't about perfection. It's about presence. The unshaking stillness in the eye of the storm. The sword left in its sheath, because it no longer needs to speak. Now maybe you're watching this late at night alone, with headphones in and the lights low. Maybe there's a breeze or the hum of your fan or just the steady rhythm of your breath. And maybe something in all this has stayed with you. Not the history, not the blood, but the feeling, that quiet knowing, that pull towards something deeper. So before you go, before this fades back into the stream of your life, I want you to sit with it. Not rush to the next video, not scroll away, just sit for a moment, with stillness, with that whisper in your chest that says, there's more to you than you've allowed yourself to live. 'Cause that's the voice Musashi followed. Through war, through loss, through every silent step toward the cave, And if it led him to truth, maybe it can lead you too. If this journey meant something to you, if you felt it, I hope you'll let me know. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what part lingered. And if you'd like to keep walking paths like this together, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs a little fire in their silence. But only if it's real, only if it resonates. Until next time, stay sharp, stay still, and walk the way not just in thought, but in life. Good night.